let's have some discussion. I mean, just to, you know, there's an old sort of arc to the three papers in a way that in Ali's presentation there was this contrast between, as it were, the strong repressive state on the one hand and this increasingly weak state structure, which is attempted to be vertically organized. And then, so this, as it were, politically repressive regime governing over an economically weak situation, a weakening situation. Then we had Charlie's, fascinating analysis of the various political strategies of reoccupation and the different techniques that have been used in an extremely vivid way. And then, and then Danny's analysis, which then wants to take us back to the economic dimension at the end, to the, if it says what we have now is a political struggle, not to forget the economic dimension, which then takes us back to what Ali was saying in the beginning. So let's, we've got three wonderful presentations, so let's have, it's cold in here, isn't it? Let's warm ourselves up with some debate. Who'd like to start? There's a gentleman at the back there. You want to come up to the mic here? Yeah, you. I guess if people want to make interventions just to sort of line up by the mics would be one way of doing it, but please.
First off, thank you all. I learned so very much, and the moderation was spectacular. This is a question mostly for Danny Postel. At the end, you're giving this message to the Green Revolution: don't set aside questions of the economic, lest you get sort of entrapped in neoliberalism if you win liberal democratic freedoms. And then, your point is well taken, but to me it smacked of a tiny bit of condescension. And my understanding is that the resistance movement in Iran, stretching back years, has had a strong social democratic impulse to it. Marxism of a soft form still has a kind of currency in the student movement especially. There's been a long-standing attraction to the Swedish model and ways of imagining an emancipated Iran that aren't necessarily neoliberal. And partly as a result of this sort of social democratic impulse, I'll call it, Western capitalist centers of power, United States and Europe, have been somewhat leery of the potentially uncontrollable aspects of this uprising, insofar as it might actually represent a challenge to a kind of global neoliberalism. And I think, the tepid support from Obama, the European Union, for this movement has been, conspicuous. And partly one suspects that if you could eliminate the nuclear problem, a lot of the powers that be would be fairly comfortable with the tyrannical status quo. And I don't mean to be cynical here. I like Obama, etc. But it's, conspicuous. So there's a sense in which, yes, Chavez is propping up Ahmadinejad. But I think the real scandal, hidden in plain sight, is how the United States and the European Union in many ways have been propping up this regime because the economic incentive to maintain a kind of status quo, billions of dollars in trade, is very powerful and has trumped the kind of affirmation of an emancipatory movement that you might expect given America's professed love for the freedoms of all people everywhere. So I just want to ask if it's not slightly more complicated, the status of the economic critique in the Iranian movement, and how we might, in a smart way, look at the capitalist world as being, in a sense, a historic supporter of a status quo that it now claims, to want to oppose. So
that's a good point.
I'm on
Danny.
the same line.
Oh, really? Andrew, on the same line?
Yeah, I think that this is a very wonderful panel, very high quality, but I think the Postel intervention was really quite wrong-headed, although brilliantly presented. I think.
Don't hold back, Andrew. Don't hold back.
Let me just say that his reading of the East European thing is wrong also, because it was not the problem of initially having the wrong strategy. There was no other strategy for dismantling resource-constrained, soft budgetary constrained economies. The problem was that the dismantling strategy was then identified as the longer-term strategy for liberal parties. So it was the subsequent 4 years, not 1989, but in 1990, but the next 4 years, which then even affected the policies of left-wing parties. That was the problem. So it was not that they were not ready in 89, 90, and I think I know this a hell of a lot better than you know it. I'm
no
old
doubt.
And I studied it before he even thought of these subjects. Okay. As to Iran, it's just that you contradict the basic trust of your fellow panelists. Because if they explain to you on the one side that half the population possibly, and in your own calculation maybe 20%, but no one knows, is on the other side, then the idea of a revolutionary breakthrough is not really in the cards. It's not just against the regime, it's also against that 20%, possibly 50%. I mean, it means that you really have to fight really half the society. So this is really then a question of revolution, counter-revolution, potential civil war. The Green Movement would be up against really not just a small stratum. And then, as the first gentleman very interestingly explained at the end, there is also a developmental strategy on the regime side, namely building a new economic vertical structure with new beneficiaries, new power structures that will have new international relations, and you'll be up against that as well. Now you're arguing in terms of a Marxian theory of history and using Gramsci on the basis of assumptions that there's some kind of possibility for some kind of linear developmental building of hegemonies, which is sort of assumed is the natural course of things, but it is not. The other side is also going to build support. The institutional structures, the new economic ones also will be built, and you're going to have confrontation on both of these sides. So this, to me, actually resembles very much what is going on in Eastern Europe exactly in the 80s, and it calls for a negotiated transformation and not a revolutionary one at all. The model is indeed the Velvet Revolutions, and not what you are thinking of as is this neo-Gramscian strategy, which, by the way, has never succeeded anywhere. I recognize that it's very popular now in the Bush era to turn back to Marx and Gramsci, but it has not succeeded anywhere, and there's no point in offering it to the Iranians now.
It's always it's a great honor to be attacked, to be savaged by Andrew Arasu, so...
I didn't know the pleasure until now, but I shall never forget it. No, I appreciate that, believe it or not, and Andrew's work has actually been very important in my own thinking. That was, for those who don't know, that was Andrew Arado, the great sociologist, political theorist, professor here at the New School. Can I respond to those first two comments just briefly? So the first question, I think, is an interesting one. I think it's a very good point about the history of social democratic currents in Iranian politics. No question about it. You can go back perhaps further, but certainly the Iranian constitutional revolution of 1906 to 1911, this has been extensively documented in Janet Afari's book on the subject. In fact, in the very subtitle of her book is Social Democracy and the Struggle for Women's Rights and so on and so forth. Social democratic, socialist, liberal socialist, democratic socialist ideas, motifs, impulses, forces were critically at work in the Iranian constitutional revolution over 100 years ago. So absolutely, obviously in the period of 1951 to 1953, we're talking about a social democratic, liberal nationalist government under Mohammad Mossadegh. And social democratic impulses are very much there. I am by no means arguing that the Green Movement is in some sense neoliberal. I'm arguing quite the contrary. What I'm saying is that the Green Movement has simply not foregrounded these economic questions, and I think that makes sense, actually. It makes total sense. I'm just simply trying to offer some friendly advice that these are critical questions that need to be considered perhaps earlier than they might think. Now, I think that actually the notion that the Green Movement in Iran